Welcome to Brash Ag, the farm innovation podcast with hosts Raymond King and Kit Franklin.
Namaste, Raymond.
Namaste. We're here in person. I've made the long journey up to Cirencester again via a quick stop off to pick up some top secret, one might say secret squirrel project work. So
there's some listeners that will get that reference, which will be good for them. You're like a bad penny, right? You keep turning up.
Yeah, that's the problem.
You want to go back to that place called Dorset? You keep telling me it's so marvellous. So we're not just sat in my house chatting between the two of us. We are joined by Roger. Roger, I don't even know your surname, Roger, because I'm really rubbish like that. So Roger, introduce yourself, and you've come all the way from New Zealand, but you sound a bit more familiar than that.
Thanks. Roger Robson-Williams from New Zealand, South Island. I'm over here visiting friends and family, and it's awesome to catch up with you folks and actually to see your lovely home kit and talk about whatever we're going to talk about.
Yeah, which is wow. So the reason that Ray and I know of you, Roger, is because you pop up on our LinkedIn feeds with electric tractors, which is cool. So we'll talk about the electric tractor in some depth, but also you've got a wider interest in sustainability and circular economy type things. And I know that whilst you're here in the UK, you've been and visited some farms, and I know that you're off to a regen conference whilst you're here as well. So I think we'll talk some strategic level farming as well, if that's all right.
Sounds good. Yeah, so I guess, just in terms of a little bit of background.
Yeah. Look at this, you did a job for us. Yeah, give us your background.
So I got a PhD in plant pathology. I worked at Rothamsted for a bit after my PhD. Then I was working in the grain and seed industry here, broadly in plant pathology and related issues. I got interested in horticulture, shifted over to New Zealand in 2012, worked at an organisation rather similar to Rothamsted, so a research organisation, but one that's a bit more commercially focused and has an income stream related to breeding new varieties of crops, particularly kiwi fruit and apples. And through that, I got really interested in kind of ag tech and robotics, because the applications, particularly for robotics in horticulture, are quite interesting. And then latterly transitioned into being the Chief Sustainability Officer there. So really interested in the organisation's own contribution to sustainability, both in terms of the energy it uses and the waste it generates, but also the leadership it could show in the horticulture and agriculture sectors through the science that we did.
Of course, so many things have already popped into my head that I could yarn about. One of them being that I had a student. Well, again, it's all about 5 or 6 years ago now, I think, but 5 or 6 years ago, I had a student who did a small piece of work for one of the modules that I used to run. And it was based upon his grandfather's farm or sort of smallholding in New Zealand where they grew kiwis. I think so. His grandfather and grandmother, I think, had moved out to New Zealand and bought themselves a kiwi farm. So it was a completely random thing for me to read, but it was really interesting nonetheless.
Yeah, and of course one of the reasons that kiwi fruit orchards are a particularly good kind of case study for automation and robotics is because of the trellising system that's generally used. It's a kind of awkward height, even for somebody that's relatively short like me. You got your head slightly bent over when you're walking under them. So operations like pollination and assessing the kind of yield and quality of the crop, those are the kind of things that you could really usefully do with a robotic platform. So there's quite a lot of work underway in that space at the moment.
Yeah, I think his project was all about, it was for a precision ag module, and I think it was all about utilising sort of site-specific nitrogen. And I think he wrote about putting nitrogen through irrigation lines or wider nutrient packages through irrigation lines is what he was writing about. It was really interesting. Anyway, Ray, you've forgotten one question.
Well, no, I was just trying to think. I think I actually, a few times on a few of the projects I've been involved in, have driven past some kiwi orchards, if you call them an orchard.
Yeah.
In France.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You would.
And I have seen that, and I've literally just behind the van, had a quick look and gone, oh, that looks interesting. And there's a big picture of a kiwi, so that's probably what they're doing here. But it sounds like they're sort of almost the automation equivalent of the strawberry farm over here. Everyone gets very excited about strawberry farm over here, doesn't when they think about picking and handling fruits and things like that. So yeah, very very interesting there. I suppose it'd be really. I mean, obviously we're kind of. You were telling us earlier, actually, we've sort of been a matchmaker for you to a certain degree and put you in contact. So we've already spoken to someone about their EV tractor. So that was Ben Bamnett. So please do go back and listen to the episode. It was a very popular episode. A lot of people have commented on it. It'd be cool to just hear, I suppose, we'll get into the details of the tractor, but sort of what were your motivations behind kind of going in that direction, and how does that play into the sort of your bigger picture of agriculture and sustainability and that side of things?
Yeah, thanks. So it's kind of by accident, my wife and I have ended up with 20 acres in North Canterbury. So it's heavy clay soil, rolling ground. It's the toe slopes of the Southern Alps. We get quite a lot of rain, about 1,200 mils a year. Might not seem much, depending on where you are in the UK, but for the Canterbury Plains, it's a relatively wet area. And we were interested really in exploring, in partnership with nature, how much positive value we could create from that in terms of food and fibre and energy. And as part of that, we were thinking, well, we can generate energy obviously through solar panels and battery storage and all that, which we're doing to quite a large extent. But how can we integrate our vehicles and potentially a tractor into that? And we became really interested in the idea of a tractor, not just as a machine that does really useful work, but as a kind of four-wheel drive and mobile power bank that would enable you to use 230-volt equipment anywhere on this property, which would be super useful for us. And also whether we could kind of tether it to the energy system for the house so that the battery capacity of the tractor could be used when you're not actually out in the field on the tractor. You can still get some utility from it, and kind of spread the capital cost of that over all of those different functions. And it just so happened there's somebody that lives a few kilometres down the road from us, a guy called Duncan, who was interested in converting tractors to battery electric. He'd already done a bit of a Heath Robinson job, and we borrowed that and thought it was completely awesome. So we asked him to build one for us, which took a wee while. But we've had a season now of kind of field testing it, basically mainly making hay, not just that, and having a lot of fun. But coming back to your question, really what we're trying to do is use the opportunity we have to show some different ways of doing things, different ways of thinking about things, get local kind of school kids and students involved. And we can afford to take some risks because, we need to generate a bit of on-farm income, but we've also got some off-farm income. So we can do things that people in a real kind of full-on commercial farming situation couldn't risk doing. So that's what we're trying to achieve through this.
So without going into the details of the tractor, which we'll do in a second, you say about the utility of having a mobile battery, essentially. What sort of size is that battery, and what's the output? What sort of machines can you run around your farm with that? Just to spark ideas in people's minds.
Yeah. So it's a 16 kilowatt hour battery on the tractor. It's got a 15 amp outlet, so you could draw 3.5 kilowatts. The inverter, without getting too technical, is the 10 kVA inverter, so you've got plenty of grunt there for getting DC power out of the battery into 240 volts. And then, of course, anything that you might want to run, so 240, 230, we talk about 230 in New Zealand, but you get a picture. So basically any kind of power tools that you want to run that you can plug into a 15 amp connection, you can run. And I mean, one of the important things I've done, and you've commented on this, I think, on one of your podcasts, is toast crumpets using the tractor. So it's just an interesting way of engaging people at ag shows, showing that you can do these slightly wacky things with an electric tractor. And I reckon you can toast about 600 crumpets on a full charge. So that gives you some idea of the capacity.
Could have done without cereals, couldn't we? We could have set a stand up just doing doing Brash ag crumpets.
Yeah, that was something we didn't comment on in our cereals coverage. But yeah, the power did go down within, I think it wasn't even 9 o'clock, was it? I think we were on the stand at 8 o'clock, and by 8:30, the power of the stand we were on, plus all the ones around us, plus the catering outlets around us, had all gone down. And new generators were being pulled in and pulled out. So yeah, the crumpet still would have been a win.
Yeah, and just on that, I was at a Regen Ag conference in New Zealand a little while ago, and you wander around and there's the hum of generators and a little bit of a whiff of diesel fumes, and at the same time there are EVs parked up in a car park. And I'm really interested, and hopefully we might even be able to do this in the next couple of years, in running one of those kind of events that is as fossil fuel free as possible. Now realistically, you're probably going to have a backup generator, but these sort of events, you've got real kind of values driven people that have come along, and I wonder if you could offer a discount for entry for people that are willing to let you take a few kilowatts from the car to run the ice cream chiller or the crumpet maker or the barista machine.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds awesome, but again, I'm stressing by the complications of that. Like, yeah, how does the physicality of plugging all these things in and not frying things? Crazy. But yeah, no, it is so true, isn't it? The key with the electric car is it's just the key with any car is they spend 95% of the time sat still. And the key with the electric car is there is a battery there not doing anything for 95% of the time.
Yeah.
And and that whole car to grid thing or car to load thing is really important.
And if we want to leap forward and think about kind of full-scale electric tractors at some point, the potential to use them in an arbitrage situation, selling energy back to the grid, potentially energy that you generated on farm, is enormous, because you'd be talking about tractors with a very substantial battery capacity that you could leverage to create a source of income when you're not going to have to take that tractor out that day or at that time.
Yeah, just imagine your electric combine harvester that literally does 6 weeks of the year. For 10 months of the year, it could be a stationary battery.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of talk of on-farm sort of battery farms, I suppose, effectively, aren't there? And
we even had a battery barn conversation at Cereals, right? We didn't record it, but we did have.
No, we did. We had an interesting conversation with with a consultancy that, and I mean, we I think it was quite early in the morning, and I'd already had a couple of coffees, and you were already just excited. So we fired a lot of information at them, but or rogue ideas. But yeah, it was an interesting conversation there, but it is worth thinking about that. And actually, I think there's a place where sort of EV tractors are going to start to come in. When I went to Agritechnica, I thought I interviewed the first one I saw, and it was a bit like going to go for dinner or something. You go in the first place you see, and then you realise there's 5 or 6 more down the road. But there was a lot of, I think, Chinese manufacturers trying to carve out that part of the niche of saying, not everyone wants one, but the people that do want one, we're here. It's a credible product. So I think a bit like EV cars, I think they're starting to find that place. So I can certainly see a place there.
And I think, in New Zealand, the situation is probably a little different to here, in the sense of price volatility around diesel, and indeed the precarity of diesel supply, is really forefront in people's minds. So before the Iran war kicked off, diesel was $1.90 a litre, and it quickly shot up over the space of about 4, maybe 5 weeks, to $3.80, $3.90 a litre. So it doubled in price, which is catastrophic for anybody who's running a haulage business or farming, or in fact families that have got a diesel ute, or and so I think that it's really important to think of both the opportunity that electrification in ag can offer, but also the kind of business risk mitigation, because ag, and indeed the whole economy, basically runs on diesel. when you think about it, whether it's transport or it's primary production, diesel's absolutely critical. And even if we're not running out of oil, we know that the sorts of oils that we're extracting now tend to yield lower fractions of diesel. And I'm really aware that, countries will hold on to their diesel supply for their own transport and farming and primary sectors. So a small country, last bus stop on the planet like New Zealand, could be particularly vulnerable to both price increases and just scarcity of supply.
So just on that, Roger, what are New Zealand's sort of green resources, as it were, when it comes to renewables? Obviously, we're here in the UK. We're not great for solar, but we do have a lot of wind in theory. If anyone would ever work out a cost-effective way of doing it, we have tide and waves, but no one's really cracked that yet, have they? I don't think. What are the renewables or the alternative energy sources that could be fed into these electric tractors and cars, etc., in New Zealand?
Yeah. Great question. So we've already touched on the fact that farms are an awesome location for distributed energy generation and storage. So sticking solar panels on barns and batteries in barns makes a lot of sense. And there's all sorts of advantages around grid resilience and so on if you do that. Of course, I'm sure it's the same in the UK. The New Zealand grid was designed basically to go one way from centralised power generation out to users of that power. So there's a bit of a kind of rethink needs to happen there. So there's that future possibility. But right now, about 85% of our electricity is renewably generated. It's somewhere between 85 and 90%. And we've got, that's because we've got a lot of hydro, we've got some geothermal, we've got some wind, and solar is growing quite quickly now as well. And of course, the combination of solar and hydro can work really well because you can, to some extent, use a hydro as a battery to store energy that you're generating when the sun's shining with solar. So that's great. Although, of course, electricity only comprises about 20% of our total energy use. So our electricity system is highly renewable, but that's only 20% of our total energy use, and the rest of it is basically fossil fuels, and a big chunk of that's diesel.
Fair, but that is obviously, therefore, with that very green grid, it is seems an ideal scenario to go straight to batteries and
it's a great starting point.
Store at peak and use at low points and all the rest of it. Yeah. So. For our tractor fans, then, Roger, let's go into the tractor briefly, and what model is it? Because again, you've not built a tractor from scratch. It's a retrofit similar to what Ben's done here in Somerset. But yeah, tell us about the machine.
So actually, just on Ben, had a great conversation with him yesterday and saw his tractor conversion, which is a bit bigger than ours. So ours is it's about a 40-year-old Kubota B8200, a hydrostatic transmission, four-wheel drive. So it's a B series tractor. So it's great for the kind of size of property we've got, but obviously limited use on a big commercial farm. And originally it would have had about, I think, 19 horsepower at a PTO, and we were looking to replicate that, maybe lift it up a little bit with the electric motor. So that was the donor tractor, and inevitably there was a certain amount of just basic refurb that had to happen, and probably more of that than we were expecting. So the front axle, for example, had to be completely reconditioned, and getting hold of parts is difficult, particularly in New Zealand. Anyway, so there's that. The motor itself is an off-the-shelf brand new 20 kilowatt water-cooled or liquid-cooled motor with a motor controller, also kind of off-the-shelf. We've actually seen the motor drawing, and I don't quite understand the maths around this. I'm not an engineer, but it has definitely drawn an instantaneous 30 kilowatts at one point. So we've changed a few settings so we don't cook anything. And as I mentioned, it's got this 10 kVA inverter, and it charges up at about 5.5 kilowatts. So typically, given that you don't run it right down to zero and you rarely need to charge it up to 100%, you're typically looking at a kind of an hour and a half or 2 hours charging time, which is a nice break off the tractor.
Yeah, that's such a great use case, isn't it? Especially in that horticultural environment, that kiwi fruit environment. I imagine there's plenty of times when a tractor's pootles around, not using a great deal of energy for 4 hours in the morning, stop for a lunch break, have a sandwich, plug it in. By the time you got back, it's more or less full again to do the 4 hours pootling around in the afternoon. It's pretty perfect. Yeah. Cool. And what jobs have you been doing with it? And I guess, how have you found in terms of it just using an electric tractor? How has it been in the field with, you say you've made hay with it, so you've been running a mower, etc. Yeah, talk about that. How has that user experience been?
So it's been awesome. So we've been on a really steep learning curve because we never made hay before, we never had a tractor before. So there's a lot to get to grips with there. So this last season has really been a kind of beta testing for us and for the implements and the tractor. And we ended up making 650 bales of hay, and these are small round bales. I don't know what you'd call them in the UK, but they're like the size of what we call a regular rectangular bale, which is about maybe 20 kgs. The cost per bale in terms of the energy use was incredibly low. It worked out about 8 cents a bale, and it would have been, if we'd used diesel, if we'd used the same amount of energy sourced from diesel, it would have cost us about 50 cents a bale. So it's a really material kind of saving. The mower we've used isn't the right mower for hay making. It's a slasher mower that we actually got for topping paddocks, but we couldn't get the mower we really need for hay making in time. And that's quite high energy consuming. I haven't expressed that very well. You get the point. The mower uses a lot of energy. And it's horribly inefficient to use the PTO for something like that. It would actually be much better to have the mower with its own electric motor and provide an electrical.
Talk about this all the time. Amount of conversations I have with people. Could implements be electric drive to save? Because they talk about building these drivetrains, even on brand new products, and say, "Oh, I'm going to put this here, this electromotor here, and hydraulics on here. I'm going to put this on there." And then, if you've got an electric power source, work your way from one end being electric all the way to the other end being electric, and you've probably extended your use considerably.
I reckon Agritechnica, I'm going to throw a random date out there, 2015 Agritechnica, Fendt did have electric PTO on a tractor which again wasn't, I think Deere had it and everyone, but actually Fendt had electric PTO and electric powered rake, I think, because they own Ag also own Fella. So, but have you ever seen it in the wild?
No.
So
it is the next logical step. I think if things take this step in the direction of ultimately being electric or having significant sources of electrical power, I think that's the next logical step, is for electric drive implements.
Yeah, and down in central Otago in New Zealand, there's a guy that's got a fully electrified cherry orchard, everything, the frost fans and his tractor and so on, and his sprayer has got his own electric motor instead of using
he was running a
he was running a Monarch.
A Monarch, yeah. So he is a case study on the Monarch website, or was.
Yeah, with Mike Casey, as it happens. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, it's interesting, Kit, you mentioned the rake, because I've been really surprised. It's a relatively small Tedder rake. It's a Citrix HM300 for anybody who wants to look it up.
Nice.
And that it uses an astonishingly little energy. It's amazing. It's incredibly efficient, certainly compared to the mower. And maybe I shouldn't be surprised, but I am constantly surprised that you can condition the hay several times on one charge without any difficulty at all.
Yeah, well, that rings absolutely true. So, I've spent quite a lot of time in my life raking out grass on, with fairly large twin rotor rakes. And the needle in a diesel tractor will barely budge in an afternoon of running around raking grass if you're on a fairly flat field. What
Ben was saying as well, wasn't he? He was saying on the downhill straights, he was saying he was regen, so he was regenning the batteries on the downhill slopes and raking at the same time, which I thought was quite remarkable.
And it's really interesting that his tractor, his energy consumption, you can see the efficiency of the stroke cut gears gearbox instead of the hydrostatic. So his larger tractor operating a slightly larger rake. In fact, I think this might be the same for the mower as well. It looks like he's getting a bit more energy efficiency out of the system than we are. But as I say, ours is four-wheel drive hydrostatic, and we're on some quite hilly ground, so we're not.
Yeah. So we haven't touched on it. So you've got a motor running into the hydro transaxle. So therefore, were you running your motor at constant speed, and you're utilising the hydrostatic transaxle? Yeah. So whereas Ben is varying the RPM of the motor into a mechanical gearbox, which he isn't changing the gear in. He's just pre-selecting a gear, and then.
That was so funny when we test drove it, and he sat down and said, "Right, okay, you want to go?" And we went, "Yeah, okay." And he was like, "Right, before you move, just put it in gear." And I'm like, okay. And it was like, which gear then? Sort of thinking I want to say first. And he's like, well, fourth's quite good. Put it in fourth, and then off you go.
Yeah. So that's interesting that, again, I always feel like, your hydrostatic transaxle is almost an unnecessary inefficiency, isn't it, really? Because the electric motor thing means you can get very good torque from very low revs, so you can just use the rev range of the motor.
I mean, ideally, with a four-wheel drive tractor, you'd have either a motor on each axle or even a motor on each wheel and a separate motor for the PTO, and maybe even a separate motor for the hydraulic pump for the quick release.
Kind of what Chinese, when I spoke to the Chinese company, they had a drive motor, dedicated drive motor, and a dedicated PTO motor, and that was their big sales pitch. Was we're the only people at the moment doing this in the EV tractor market. Obviously, it's a small niche at the moment, but that was one of their sales pitches.
Yeah, I mean, Taffe have got their electric tractor, but it's essentially a motor and a battery taking the position of an engine going into a conventional back end. Again, it's in that compact class as well. I think in the order of a sort of 30 horsepower type tractor.
The thing I like about Ben's is because of the straight cut gears, it's still got a bit of noise to it, so it sort of feels like it's a bit alive. I think that sometimes
sounds like a rally car.
It just sounds, because of the straight cut gears, and you sort of get out of it, and it's not loud, but you sort of, your brain plays a trick on you, because you think you can hear an engine when you're driving, and you can't. And you can't, because it's not as loud as it would be otherwise, but because there's that mechanical noise going on, I kind of liked it for that, because I thought it isn't probably as efficient as some sort of direct drive, but it made it feel a bit alive and have a bit of personality, which was nice.
And look, what we wanted to do and what Ben's trying to do is upcycle old kit that might otherwise just end up on the scrap heap, and that's a good thing to do in itself if the use case allows. And an interesting difference between the approach that we've taken, or rather Duncan, our friend who's done the engineering's taken, and the approach Ben's taken, is that Ben's using basically second-hand EV parts from scrapped or crashed EVs, whereas ours has been built from kind of off-the-shelf new components. And I'm not saying one's better than the other. The fact is, in New Zealand, we just don't have that supply of EV parts. There's just, to the same extent you do here in the UK and Europe. So, but they're both really, really interesting approaches, and it'll be cool to see how that plays out.
Yeah, well, again, we'll stop talking about Ben because we're here to talk about you, Roger, but it is interesting. He has now sort of started marketing that conversion package, and anyone listening in the UK who wants a converted vintage or, older tractor, Ben is willing to go through that conversion with you. So that's an interesting development since we saw him last year.
And some say he is the outfit that Ben operates.
Yeah, great. So Roger, going back to your experience in the haymaking, what sort of hours have you put on your tractor, and what's the reliability been like? Has it been solid? And
Yes.
I mean, speaking as someone who's developed bleeding edge technologies and put them into field in my life, you get problems. Yeah. So any of those?
Yeah, so we've operated the tractor for about 70 hours. Through the haymaking, we used about 500 kilowatt hours of electricity. So yeah, half a megawatt of electricity it turned into useful work. It performed really well. The charging wasn't an issue for us, but I think one of the key things is, people tend to look for a plug-in solution to the system they've got now, and I understand why that's the case. But going back to what I said earlier about the position we're in of being able to take risks and do things slightly differently, we could sort of design our system around the constraints and capabilities of the tractor. Not that it's really been a limitation, because it's not got a cab. Basically, after a couple of hours on the tractor, I'm ready for a little bit of a break anyway. So that charging issue hasn't been a problem. Although there have been one or two occasions where the weather's coming in and we need to get the last few bales done, and that has been a little bit, are we going to be able to eke this charge out? But in practice, that has been okay. And that's in actually a difficult season where we only had a 3 or maybe 4 day window to get it cut, dried and baled, which has been, it's been a difficult season.
No, that is an interesting thing to bring into the mix though, isn't it? Because it's very easy for, I guess, technology positive people such as Ray and I to go, yeah, it's absolutely fine because you do this much time and then you sit and have lunch and that's all great in principle. And it's a bit like the early electric cars where they say, well, yeah, it'll be fine because 90% of your journeys are under 20 miles. Yeah, but everyone sits at home and goes, yeah, but 10% are over 20 miles, and every farmer will sit at home and go, yeah, that's all marvelous on paper until that day when things really need to happen, and if they don't happen, I'm going to be in trouble and financially, my business is going to be at risk. And at that point, gut reaction is I'd rather have the reliability of a diesel tractor, I suppose. So that's an interesting psychological element to the adoption.
Yeah, and certainly if you're doing any contracting, you've got that, and then on steroids, that kind of pressure to get things done. So I really understand that, and the kind of risk aversion. And we're not saying that isn't a thing. We're just saying that we're in a lucky position that we can kind of manage that. But in practice, that hasn't really been a problem. Early on we had one of the battery cells crap out. So the tractor's got 2 battery packs, each with 18 cells in them. Unfortunately, it was the top pack. And you don't have to do too much disassembly to get at it. And we didn't actually believe the battery monitoring system, which monitors the health of each of the cells, and it was bang on that this one had crapped out. So we changed it and got that turned around in maybe 48 hours. I went down and helped Duncan with that, which was great, so I could actually get a more hands-on sense of how the thing was kind of put together. So that was good. And the other problem we had, so that battery cell really was, I suspect, a manufacturing defect in that particular cell. The other problem we had was the motor controller, which is the thing that governs the flow of energy from the battery pack to the motor, burst into flames. But I think that was a little bit of a user error on my part. Now, the fuses should have blown and that shouldn't quite have happened. But it was a simple, swapping out the unit, and Duncan had one in stock, and we do need to get a stock of those sorts of components to have on hand just in case it happens again. And that we got turned around in a day. So that was, and that happened after the haymaking season. So, but otherwise, it's been very reliable. And, when you're dealing with something like this, I very much regarded it as a beta testing phase because that's what it is, and very happy with how it's played out.
I think we commented on one of your LinkedIn posts, and I phrased it something along the lines of hayonomics, where you kind of broke down the economics of this of your system and how you were working it, but you kind of did it in like hay bales worth of energy or that sort of things. It'd be interesting just to kind of get some of the sort of facts and numbers perhaps around that perhaps you haven't already covered, I suppose, in terms of the tractor, its use, and how that kind of fits in as well for the rest of the operation.
Maybe I'll just start off by talking about the capital cost. So we've paid 40,000 New Zealand dollars for this tractor, although we got $10,000 of co-funding from the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority, which is just a New Zealand government entity that is supporting, as the name implies, energy efficiency and conservation. And when you think about in New Zealand, we would have had to spend at least 20 grand to get a kind of equivalent second-hand diesel tractor. So in effect, what it's cost us, the net cost to go electric is 10 grand with the funding from ECA. So that's the kind of the capital cost. Having said that, I think Duncan, our good friend who did the conversion, has lost quite a lot of money on the whole gig. I'm not sure that's actually what the tractors cost. Anyway, that's what we paid for it. In terms of energy savings, again, this is probably not super relevant to listeners in the UK because your kind of energy market is quite different and electricity is more expensive relatively and maybe diesel's cheaper. But if you look at the cumulative savings over the course of the haymaking season, so the 4 months in New Zealand from January to April, we saved getting on for $3,000 in energy costs. And so, that 10 grand, the payback time on that is looking pretty good. And that's just 4 months. And okay, those are the 4 months of probably most intense use, but that's not including the way we're going to use the tractor in the winter in terms of energy storage and potentially arbitrage. So from that point of view, it's pretty good. And I already mentioned the cost per bale is sort of de minimis, really, the energy input. So that's good. I'm not sure what else to say really about the hay and noise. Well, actually, there is one other really important thing, and this is a little bit abstract. Okay, so we just talked about numbers and money, which everybody kind of gets and is interested in. But just the thought experiment, how much time does it take to replenish the energy that you use to do this work? So if we take mowing half a hectare, so if you do that by hand, it will take a person somewhere between 1 and 2 days to by hand using
to scythe it.
To scythe. And they use somewhere between 500 watts and a kilowatt of energy. It's amazing. We're incredibly efficient when it comes to that. And basically, it would take you 8 or maybe 16 hours to recover from that, depending on whether it took you 1 or 2 days. Basically, having a meal, going to bed, you wake up, you do it again. With the electric tractor mowing half a hectare, that uses about 12, or in our case, it used about 12 kilowatt hours of energy. And that would take about, an hour, maybe 2 hours to replenish that, charging the tractor up. If you were to use a diesel tractor, say 120 horsepower diesel tractor, that would use about 40 kilowatt hours of energy in the form of diesel. But of course, to replenish that, you're talking somewhere between 10 and 300 million years. And in practice, it's impossible. So, thinking about the baseline for what's okay, if what's okay is being able to replenish that energy in a reasonable timescale, then it's another way of saying fossil fuels are not such a flash option.
Yeah, no, really interesting. And if agriculture continues to look as it does, Western agriculture, contemporary agriculture, so 180 horsepower average size tractors, the mass of battery to give you an 8-hour, 10-hour working day makes those a real monstrosity. It takes the tractor that would weigh 8 tons and it takes it up to probably 18 tons or something close to that sort of number. So that's my real issue with electrification of farming, is if the farming stays looking like what it currently looks like. If farming morphs into some of the things that I've obviously spent my life talking about, which is smaller, lighter tractors and maybe swarms of smaller, lighter tractors, then electrification makes all the sense in the world, because the efficiencies get better and better and better as the thing gets smaller. It needs to carry less load, etc. And obviously we always point to the farm droid as being a great example of a solar powered robot that's in a field doing work completely replenished by the sun on a daily basis, and with nothing else plugged into it. So the point there is that electric becomes the correct solution if the tractors change shape, and the problem is the shape of the tractors. I guess, therefore, this somewhat segues on, and I wanted to ask you about it anyway. You said at the start you were doing this in order to get farmers onto your farm to see it, or at shows to see it. What have those interactions been like? Have they done the thing that I used to get before the dreaded hands-free word comes up? I would talk about ag automation and people would go, not in my lifetime, mate, not for 50 years. The minute we did hands-free, that flipped that conversation, and people went, oh, okay, this could work. I could see it working. Have you had that similar conversation change? Now you've got a demonstration and people can touch it and feel it and smell it?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So we've been to a couple of ag shows, so we haven't done a lot of this yet, and we want to do more of it. And I was kind of expecting to get that sort of pushback and people to be quite kind of cynical about it and, identify the many barriers that we need to overcome between where we are now and the practical application of large-scale electrification on farms. But actually, maybe people are just being polite, but people are kind of interested, actually seeing it, even if it's just a small tractor, seeing it, being able to kick the tires, it kind of changes the story a bit, because you're not talking about some abstract thing. And the energy source that you use to farm really shouldn't be an ideological issue. It should be a business risk management and economic issue. And so when people can see a tractor and you can talk about what you've done, and we're completely open about the fact that we're operating at a small scale, but this is just trying to demonstrate proof of concept at that scale, and acknowledging, fossil fuels, diesel, it's like a miracle fuel. It's like magic. This high energy density and all those things, good things we know about it. We have to recognise that its days are numbered for a whole bunch of reasons. And how do we begin to achieve a just transition from diesel-powered machines to something else? Back to your question, people have been interested and engaged, and the only person that was a little bit, maybe a little bit snotty about it was somebody with a pretty strong vested interest in pushing hydrogen as an alternative. And of course, hydrogen is an alternative, and that's something that needs to be explored as well. But otherwise, a pretty warm reception.
And with that warm reception, have people alluded to the fact that seeing it has changed their mind at all? Have people made that sort of noises? Because that's definitely what we got. It's like, well, now I can see a thing drive itself. Okay, I can picture it now, sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think people worry about stuff like, is it going to burst into flames? And so being able to talk to a human being that's charged and discharged the battery quite a few times, notwithstanding the motor controller that did burst into flames, but that wasn't a charging issue. It reassures people that these things, there's just a lot of misinformation about the risk, particularly fire risk associated with EVs. And I think a lot of people also acknowledge that they've got a mix of machines on their farm, and it might not be possible to instantly electrify everything. It isn't, but maybe there's something that you use mostly around the yard, mostly for hauling stuff, and maybe that's the kind of gateway drug to electrifying your farm equipment by starting with that. And the economics of it in New Zealand, in terms of the capacity to on farm generate your own energy to power your equipment, are really pretty compelling. So I think it's just really a matter of time.
I think we need to tip our hat to the fact that we went around the show last week and we asked everyone how much is it going to cost, and we had to ask them, and you told us straight off the bat how much it's going to cost. So I think we need to tip our hats to the fact that you offered that up, because I was going to ask it, but no, I think that's good, and it's good to kind of understand that and kind of the bigger picture of how everything clicks in. And I suppose feedback from the conversations you've had in New Zealand is interesting. I suppose you're on a bit of a UK kind of tour at the moment, so it'd be good to kind of hear, obviously we know you've spoken to Ben, but perhaps some of the other people you've spoken to, have you spoken about, this project and, well, this tractor, but also the kind of the wider scale of things. I know you said you were speaking to someone in Cornwall, so it'd just be interesting to kind of hear about that from a UK perspective, and also what's going on in the UK as well.
Yeah, so I caught up with Stuart Oates, who's based down near Helston in Cornwall, and he's got it's not yet a fossil fuel free farm, but that's what he's aiming for. And he's using a really interesting combination of hydrogenated vegetable oil that he's importing from the US and electrification, and trying to balance those two and look at the equipment and the use case and see, right, at this moment in time, which application is going to be best for which. And so he's really kind of pushing things quite hard in that space, and also looking at the on-farm energy generation and storage. So that's a very, very useful and very interesting conversation. And as a sidebar, not related to energy, we're interested in trying to shift away from plastic netting for wrapping around bales, because obvious reasons. And one of the options that is emerging in New Zealand is a jute-based netting that we're going to try out next season. You might have heard of.
I think we walked past the stand with it on at Cereals, Ray, and really badly. I kind of noticed it, thought it was interesting, but I think we were mid-conversation. One of those really bad walk past. We probably should have gone and had
Yeah, we should have spoken to them.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a sidebar, but Stuart had some experience of trying that, and some upsides and some downsides on the kind of commercial scale, and the really kind of the high tension bales that he was trying to create. In our situation, be interesting to see how well it works. So looking forward to that. So that was a great conversation. As I mentioned, and we've talked a lot about Ben, had a great catch up with Ben and comparing the approaches we've taken to converting our tractors. And yeah, at the end of this week, I'm going to a Regen Ag conference, and Stuart is actually going to be on one of the panel discussions, and that will give me a greater sense of the vibe in the UK around that, because it's all about fossil fuel free farming. And so I'm very much looking forward to participating in that.
So I'm going to take us down a slightly different avenue then, Roger. Your background is, I would guess, fairly traditional agriculture in terms of breeding and crop breeding and those sorts of things. What are your thoughts on the whole regen world? What's your views on regen? I mean, I say this, I'm kind of teeing you up. Well, I don't know if I'm teeing you up at all, but I guess my thoughts would be regen is brilliant, and there's a lot of great about it, but there's also some fairly lacking science and some hope and magic that's wrapped up in it. So I'm just intrigued from you as a crop scientist, ultimately, what your view on that whole movement is.
Yeah, thanks. So, thanks a lot. So we talk a lot about at home. We talk a lot about regeneration, but not in the sense of a particular farming system, but much more broadly. How do we regenerate the ecosystems that we've depleted, regenerate the resources that we've consumed? How do we help the planet assimilate pollution, which is currently exceeding its capacity to assimilate? So we take a very broad view of regeneration. And in fact, the partnership my wife and I have established is called Regenerations, and partly a play on regen, but partly because this is about future generations of humans and other than human beings on this planet having the opportunity to thrive. And so I think what is happening with regenerative agriculture is people want to define it and set criteria that you can assess to say this is more or less regenerative. And as soon as you start to do that, you open up the possibility of people gaming the system and disagreements about what regenerative is. So I kind of take the view, if in whatever sphere of activity, whether it's agriculture or any other part of life, you're trying to be mindful and acknowledge the negative and positive impacts that you create through doing that. That's a great starting point. And putting my kind of freelance sustainability consultant hat on, the first step is to just be honest with yourself. What forms of positive and negative value are we creating here? And that might be in environmental terms, it might be in social terms, you might be propping up governance institutions inadvertently or deliberately that are really not in the best interests of future generations. So I take quite a different view on what being regenerative means to a narrow concept of a farming system that's somehow perhaps less worse than another farming system?
Yeah, no, okay, that was a neat way of navigating my horrible question. I mean, I think I fully align with you. I think in the sense that I am all about, and on the family farm I'm on, we're all about trying to make it better for everything. You know, we're trying to, we planted trees 20 years ago because there wasn't any trees on the farm, etc. And it's noticing, you know, trying to encourage the swallows that dropped off for a while and now they're coming back. And, you know, so there's just good to be done by having this idea of let's try and regenerate, let's try and build nature, let's try and build stable systems that self-support and all that is great. I guess the sort of niggle I was trying to get to, I guess, is that fact that there's, because it is the new buzz thing, there is now a load of companies trying to sell new buzz things that quite often have not much rigor behind them. So, you know, buy this something magic in a bottle or can or bag and it's going to be regen for you, and it's like that's where I kind of lose my way a bit, is where it gets where being from that, having friends who are crop scientists and do crop trials that are extremely rigorous. Yes, they might be based on chemicals or whatever, but when they say, right, this is the outcome of this trial, a dose of this achieves this, to them what you see going on in this new, I hate the phrase, but Wild West, has a bit of an issue for me. So that's kind of where I was going with that question, is that maybe dubious science. But I take your point about this. It's a great wider concept, and I fully agree, but it's just the dubious science that's popping up, let's say. So
you kind of give me an opportunity there to say something that I think is really quite important here, that, you know, farmers in the advanced economies are operating within a system which is about profit maximization, and not just for them very often, but for the suppliers that they're buying stuff from. And, you know, until we find a way of properly costing in both the tremendous obvious value that we get from food and the other products of the primary sector, along with acknowledging some of the impacts of that and how you cost them in, and we get a realistic, I mean, if we're talking about food here, get a realistic price for food that reflects the cost of producing it. You know, how crazy is it that we have a system where people are struggling to make a decent living producing food, and other humans are struggling to be able to afford to buy it? You know, and it's a massive, knotty socioeconomic issue to resolve, but that's really at the heart of it. And so if you've got people trying to sell snake oil, it's partly because that's the system we're operating in. But I would say farmers have got an awful lot of common sense, and good luck to the snake oil sales people.
I think with any sort of explosion of things like that, you know, just, well, snake oil, effectively, you eventually kind of, they get hammered out of the system by sort of trial and error and people talking, but also, you know, there's companies that have set up, and they've, you know, their whole aim is to sort of say, right, here's a big list of all the things, and these are the outcomes that we've seen from our group of farmers or our people that use them, and also sort of provide a marketplace for them as well, so you can kind of go, well, these ones are actually effective and they meet the criteria of what I'm trying to achieve. So I think you always get that, don't you? You get that with everything. I mean, you get that with like AI. People go, oh, you've got this AI tools attached to this, and you go, well, it's completely pointless. Like, I'm quite happy with the way this function worked before. It didn't need a chatbot attached to it, but it gets added on because then you can, you know, it's just another sort of sales feature. So I think, and over time, again, that kind of gets hammered out into what's value add and what works and what doesn't. So I think that's fair enough.
And I guess if I could just, one last thing on regen would be the people that I've spoken to in New Zealand about this are people for whom it's not just a way of looking at the inputs and outputs of farming, but it's a kind of a way of life, and they're looking to not only be kinder to their soils, but be kinder to themselves, actually, and it comes back to that profit motive. Sure, they've got to stay in business, but it's not about profit maximization at any cost, and nobody really wants to be in that position. But debt being what it is, some people find themselves in that position. So it's a very complex melange of big systemic issues.
I think there's some of it. The problem is actually that it isn't even around profit maximization. There's a certain amount of vanity and yield maximization.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of, well, the agronomist says we've got to do that, and if the agronomist says we do that, we'll get X tons to the hectare. And that's what you want to tell people about down the pub. And it's not a case of saying, well, I'm not going to tell anyone about the yields because the yields were crap, but my inputs were low, my costs were low, and my profit margins were high. And then you say, well, in that instance, you've cut your inputs, you've cut the stress you're putting on the fields, the soil, the system, the whole thing, but you've still made money at the end of it. You can't go and put the medal around your neck and say you've got the highest yields in the county or the country or whatever, but you're not optimizing for that. And I think it's long been a scenario where, and subsidies kind of previously have pushed that to the nth degree, because it was about the amount you produce, whereas now I think it's about the cost at which you produce it and the price at which you sell it.
And we've said before that was ultimately always an aim of precision farming, because if you know exactly every inch of your farm and you know all the input costs and then you know what yields from that, you can create gross margin maps essentially, and you know the bits that you maybe treat differently next time. So there has been a concentration on maximising yield. It really needs to flip to a maximising profit, and it also needs to flip to a maximising way of life as well. So interesting stuff. So Roger, we've probably got 3 or 4 minutes left to stick within the hour that Ray and I normally aim for, although I feel like we could probably talk for hours. I'm going to give you an opportunity for your sales pitch. You mentioned your freelance consulting and the company you've established. So what are they offering? Obviously, our audience is mostly UK based. So would you be happy to offer those services in the UK as well as in New Zealand? So talk us through that.
So part of the offering is, here we are, my wife and I, 20 acres in North Canterbury, just trying to do things a bit differently. So trying to produce food and fibre and biodiversity value, restore wetlands and so on. That's an offering. Anybody that's interested in that kind of stuff, we're keen to learn and share what we're doing. I guess the other half of it is my freelance consultancy work, which is largely based around a framework called the Future Fit Business Benchmark, which actually originates in the UK, the Future Fit Foundation. And what I like about this is, the question that lots of particularly smaller businesses have is, where do I start with sustainability? Or sometimes, a bit like Eeyore said of Tigger, what is it and when's it leaving? And the Future Fit Business Benchmark is a way of getting started on that sustainability journey by helping you to understand where you're creating the biggest potential negative impacts, and in fact also where you're creating positive impact, because this isn't all just about mitigating harm. This is about restoring and regenerating. And so that's something that I'm really keen to offer to more and more small businesses, particularly in the kind of ag sector, because that's where my interest and heart really lies. So I can't do that consulting in the UK because I live in New Zealand, but there are accredited advisors offering Future Fit Business Benchmark in the UK, and the foundation's got a fantastic website. And the thing with this is it's all open source, and you can certainly, and I would recommend that you spend some money on getting an advisor to help you navigate your way into it to start with. But the whole intention of this is about upskilling people to understand their risks and opportunities and to manage that themselves. And the other thing I love about it, coming from a science background, is based on decades of system science. So this isn't something that's been kind of plucked out of the air. It's the synthesis, it's a distillation of a whole load of system science that tells us what we need to have a flourishing future society and what you as an individual or as a business can do to make a contribution towards that. So it's very robust and it's all very transparent. So that's my suggestion for UK listeners would be check out the Future Fit Foundation's website. And for anybody in New Zealand that might listen to this, drop me a line and we'll have a yarn.
What's the best way to get in contact with you? Is it LinkedIn? Obviously, you're quite prevalent on there. That's how we found you. But
yeah, LinkedIn's a good option. Okay. Yeah. Or my email address, Roger, no D, Roger, at regenerations.nz.
Raymond, any final thoughts?
You always close out all of your videos on LinkedIn with, and you say something, and I don't know what it is, but I'd like you to end with that. It's
Kia ora.
Kia ora. You always say that at the end. I assume that's a New Zealand greeting or gestures, goodbye.
It's a greeting. When you meet somebody, you might say kia ora. And you can, sometimes if you really want to back up what somebody said, you might say kia ora. And you can close things out with kia ora.
Okay.
Or ka kite.
There you go. More multifaceted words.
Yes. Yeah.
This is marvellous. I say the word marvellous because I was chatting to some friends the other day and they said, I don't know, random conversation. I said, I'll say marvellous in the pod one day. There we go, I've done it. Raymond, who are we going to tell this week?
Well, I think all this talk of orchards, I think you need to, it's going to be a search for a few people to go and do this, but you need to go and tell your most local Kiwi farmer.
Go and tell your Kiwi farmer to listen to Brash Ag. Marvellous. Everyone, thank you for listening. We will catch you next week. And I guess I should say, kia ora.
Kia ora.
You have been listening to Raymond King and Kit Franklin. Brash Ag. Thank you, and tune in next time.